A big deal? Lawmakers reach a tentative agreement on border security to avoid another government shutdown. We have details from Capitol Hill. Fight for the unborn.
Most people are shocked that it's legal to kill the baby after it's born alive.
Pro-life lawmaker Steve Scalise with his reaction to the late-term abortion proposals from Democrats. Worldwide abuse scandal. A church leader helping to combat clergy's sexual misconduct gives a glimpse into the Vatican's upcoming summit. We have a report from Rome. And a night to shine. A Catholic church in Virginia teams up with a Heisman Trophy winner to give special needs teens an evening they will never forget. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Congressional negotiators say they've reached a compromise to stop another government shutdown from kicking in later this week. But President Trump says he is not happy with it. The proposal doesn't include $5.7 billion he wanted for a border wall. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us now. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The deal's $1.4 billion would build 55 miles of new fencing in Texas. The White House in December asked for 215 miles along the border. Today, Republicans tell me they want to actually see the deal before committing to voting yes. The president says he's looking at other ways to fund the wall.
I can't say I'm happy. I can't say I'm thrilled.
President Trump also doesn't say whether he'll accept Congress's funding deal, reached last night in the office of Democrat Patrick Leahy.
We're satisfied. Everybody had to give some, but we have a good package.
The deal includes money for new technology, humanitarian aid sought by Democrats, and a border barrier.
I think they ought to show us a picture. I just don't know what it means. Now, it could mean, it could be that this is something that the Democrats have come up with to allow Speaker Pelosi to save face, so she can say there isn't a wall.
Speaker Pelosi had earlier committed to no money for the wall.
The end result, though, is that you have to move forward. You have to find some sort of a compromise in which all sides can feel that they got something in order to move forward.
The deal would also stop the government from shutting down this Friday night, just weeks after a 35-day shutdown, the longest in U.S. history.
A shutdown would abrogate our responsibility to the American people, and we need to avoid the traumatic gut punch to our economy and to the American people that a shutdown would bring.
The president says he's examining his options for border funding.
Am I happy with where we're going? I'm thrilled, because we're supplementing things and moving things around, and we're doing things that are fantastic and taking from far less important areas. And the bottom line is we're building a lot of wall. Right now, we're building a lot of wall.
President Trump could still declare a national emergency, which would allow him to transfer other funds. The president adds he doesn't want another government shutdown, and he doesn't think there will be one. Lauren?
One of the sticking points, Jason, was over the number of detention beds for detained immigrants. Democrats wanted to cut back. How is that being received today?
Some Republicans were very critical of those Democratic moves. Senator Lindsey Graham said that would incentivize illegal immigration, but the lead GOP negotiator, Senator Shelby of Alabama, just said that President Trump will still have discretionary money that he can use to keep 50,000 detention beds.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. At his first political rally since the midterm elections, President Trump charged ahead last night with his pledge to build a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border. But he also discussed Democrats and what he calls their extreme views on abortion.
Millions of innocent, beautiful babies are counting on us to protect them, and we will.
The president was speaking in El Paso. He says the Democrat Party wants to execute babies even after they are born. He renewed his calls for laws to ban late-term abortions. And here at the Capitol, congressional Republicans are intensifying their efforts to counter late-term abortion bills. House members are looking to force a floor vote on legislation aimed at requiring medical care protections for infants born during an abortion. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is Republican Congressman Steve Scalise from Louisiana. Representative Scalise serves as the Republican whip and is a member of the Pro-Life Caucus. Congressman Scalise, welcome back to our broadcast.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
I want to talk about pro-life legislation in the House, but first, what was your reaction to the proposed budget deal when you heard about it this morning?
Well, you know, I always have said we need to secure the border. The president campaigned on this, but he's made it very clear that he needs the tools to secure the border. Right now, there are current limitations in law on where the president can build new wall, for example. Those limitations need to be removed. We need to let the experts, the people that actually are risking their lives to secure our border, let them have the tools they need to do what they need to do best. They know where they need to build new wall. They know what kind of wall needs to be built. You know, we shouldn't be telling them it has to be cement or it can't be steel structure. Let them do what they need to do to keep our country safe and to do it in a safe and effective way, because they're under attack too. We see our border agents being attacked. They need more tools to keep themselves safe while they're risking their lives to keep us safe.
Well, let's turn now to protecting the unborn. What's your reaction to the New York Reproductive Health Act passed into law by Governor Cuomo that permits abortion up until birth? And then the comments by Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, also a Democrat, in which he seemed to defend a proposal for late-term abortions. Your response?
Yeah, it's shocking, first of all, and you know, you think about how barbaric this is, where they're celebrating in New York the fact that if a baby is born alive through an abortion, they can still kill it. The governor of Virginia is going through and explaining a procedure of how they can kill the baby after it's born. We're not even talking about abortion anymore. Most people are shocked that it's legal to kill the baby after it's born alive. So Ann Wagner has a bill called the Born Alive Act. First of all, it makes sure that a baby that's born out of the mother's womb alive has all protections and can't be murdered. And it would be murder if a doctor or anyone else took that baby's life. I think it's common sense. Everybody should be for it, but we tried bringing that up, and Democrats refused to allow us to bring the bill up.
Right. House Democrats for the last 4 legislative days have blocked calls for unanimous consent to bring up this bill. You asked for unanimous consent. They've blocked you. Are you surprised by this resistance?
I'm surprised that they want to align themselves with this far left radical extreme wing of their party that believes in abortion not only on demand, but after the baby's born. That's no longer abortion. It's a life living outside the mother's womb. It's murder. And yet in some states they can actually take the life still to this day. We ought to ban it all across the country and give those babies full protection.
Well, what's another approach to this if you don't get unanimous consent? What would be the next step?
Well, ultimately, I've also filed legislation working with Congresswoman Wagner to have a discharge petition where we can get signatures. And if you get 218 signatures of members of Congress, then you can bring the bill to the floor, even if Nancy Pelosi doesn't want it to come to the floor, which she does not. But there are a lot of members, both Republican and Democrat, who campaigned saying they were pro-life. They need to sign the discharge petition when it finally comes to fruition. So I'm going to push this issue, and ultimately I'm going to start, when I'm able to legislatively get a discharge petition signed by members of Congress. We need 218. We're going to be letting people know all around the country how they can engage their member of Congress to make sure they sign the petition and bring the bill to the floor to give these babies that are born alive full protection under law.
Now, before we let you go, we just have a few seconds. You've called Democrats' Green New Deal a bad deal for the country. Is there anything Republicans can work with or agree on in that deal?
Look, we all want to see our country become as energy efficient as possible, to see all renewable forms of energy get even more cost effective. You know, wind and solar power are continuing to grow in popularity. They can't provide the electricity that we need to fuel our household needs, let alone our transportation needs. And this idea that in 10 years we won't have any kind of fossil fuels, you won't even be able to fly airplanes. It would jack up the cost of household electricity rates in many cases by 30–40%. and yield no benefit to the environment. You'd actually have more carbon emissions because all of the jobs that are created manufacturing things in America would be banned here, so they would go to countries like China and India where they emit 4 or 5 times the amount of carbon to make the same products because we already have good environmental standards. Let's not wreck our economy on this crazy fantasy land idea that literally would make it impossible to fly airplanes in 10 years and cows wouldn't be able to exist in America. This is ridiculous.
Representative Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, great being with you.
Former astronaut Mark Kelly says he will run for Senate in Arizona in 2020. The 54-year-old Democrat is aiming to finish the late John McCain's final term. He and his wife, former Representative Gabby Giffords, who was shot in a failed assassination attempt, are prominent gun control advocates. He will face incumbent Republican, right here, Martha McSally. She was endorsed last year by National Right to Life. A Michigan farewell for former Congressman John Dingell, a Washington legend. Hundreds gathered at a Catholic church outside Detroit to remember the man who served in Congress longer than any other person in American history. Former Vice President Joe Biden was among those in attendance. John Dingell died Thursday at 92. A second funeral for the Democrat will be held in Washington this week. He'll be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Dingell's casket is scheduled to arrive here in Washington later today and will be driven past the U.S. Capitol building where he served for 59 years. A military plane carrying some members of Congress to Dingell's funeral was forced to turn back to Washington earlier because of bad weather. It didn't stop the group from honoring the congressman. Missouri Representative Billy Long was on board. He tweeted, "We held an impromptu service at 30,000 feet for John Dingell, led by Representative John Lewis, Speaker Pelosi, and Representative Fred Upton. After a delayed start, we took off for Detroit and circled there for an hour waiting for the temperature to rise 1 degree. It didn't, and we're back at Joint Base Andrews." After nearly 3 months of testimony, a federal jury finds Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman guilty of all 10 criminal counts against him. The 61-year-old was charged with running a continuing criminal enterprise as the leader of the Sinaloa cartel. The jury deliberated for more than 6 days. El Chapo faces a mandatory sentence of life in prison. More than 150 Catholic priests in Mexico have been removed from ministry over the past 9 years because of sexual abuse. A church leader says some of the clergy have been prosecuted and sent to prison, but did not specify how many. For more on this story, including how the church is addressing abuse in Mexico, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. The head of France's Catholic Bishops' Conference is talking to lawmakers about sexual abuse and how it can be prevented. The group is writing a report to combat pedophilia across all of the country's institutions. The recommendations are expected in April. And those stories are only some of the reasons why the Vatican is going to hold a global summit next week on combating clergy sexual abuse. A member of the organizing committee says the meeting will focus on educating bishops about misconduct. Father Hans Zollner, the Vatican's abuse expert, briefed journalists today ahead of the 3-day meeting. Pope Francis has summoned all the presidents of the bishops' conferences around the world to address the crisis in the church. Hannah Brockhouse, senior Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency, joins us now. Hannah, you attended the press conference. What is the Vatican revealing about the summit?
Well, Lauren, we don't know a lot about the full schedule of the 4 days of the summit. We do know there will be a mass at some point, and we know that there will be a penitential liturgy. We also know that they're going to focus on 3 main themes. One is the accountability of bishops, another their responsibility toward victims of abuse, and the third is transparency, whether it's with civil authorities or the people of God. We also know that there will be the participation of a number of victim survivors of clergy abuse, but we don't really have any details at the moment about where they're coming from or how many there will be.
Hannah Brockhouse, Pope Francis has said we need to manage our expectations ahead of the summit. Did Father Zollner address that?
He did. He mentioned that the issue of abuse is a global one that has also been a part of the history of the world, that we should remember that this summit isn't going to suddenly solve this problem, which has been around for ages, and that this isn't a magic solution.
Pope Francis recently acknowledged for the first time the problem of priests and bishops sexually abusing nuns. Will this topic also be addressed next week?
Well, Father Zollner said that that issue didn't really come into the spotlight until after the initial planning and announcement of the meeting. So he said while abuse of anyone and any type of adult is a terrible, terrible thing, this meeting will be focused specifically on the abuse of minors.
Hannah Brockhouse, senior Rome correspondent for our partners, Catholic News Agency. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Lauren.
The Holy See continues to weigh a request from Socialist President Nicolas Maduro to intervene in the country's political crisis.
A nuestro actual presidente, que es Juan Guaidó.
A group representing Venezuela's opposition leader was at the Vatican yesterday, and one representative says she hopes the Holy See and the Italian government support Juan Guaidó. The group met with the Vatican's Deputy Secretary of State, Monsignor Edgar Parra, who is from Venezuela. Nearly 4 countries, including the U.S., are taking part in naval drills off the coast of Pakistan. Amman 2019 is meant to enhance cooperation in fighting pirates, terrorists, and smugglers. The 5-day event ends today. Macedonia raises its flag ahead of its name change. The flag at its main government building flies high as NATO members continued to ratify its accession into the group. Later this week, Macedonia is expected to formally adopt its new name, North Macedonia, the name change deal that ended the dispute nearly 3 decades. Pope Francis is set to visit the country later this year. Coming up, an update on the lawsuit against pro-life activist David Daleiden. And Louisiana Attorney General discusses the Supreme Court's setback of a state law helping the unborn. A judge in California says the names of more than a dozen Planned Parenthood workers secretly taped will remain sealed during the trial of 2 pro-life activists. David Daleiden, a frequent guest on our broadcast, is one of the defendants. He's accused of secretly making videos of Planned Parenthood employees showing the alleged sale of baby body parts for profit. California's Attorney General wanted the names kept secret because those recorded say they fear bodily harm. Daleiden and a co-defendant face criminal charges of invasion of privacy, and they have pleaded not guilty. Lawmakers in Ohio reintroduced what's being called the heartbeat bill. It would ban abortion once a baby's heartbeat is detected, usually around 6 weeks. The proposal has failed twice, but this time has the support of the newly sworn-in Republican governor. And the Attorney General for Louisiana says he will do all he legally can to protect the state's women and the unborn. He's considering next steps following last week's vote by the Supreme Court to stop Louisiana from requiring abortion doctors to have hospital admitting privileges. And joining me now is that Louisiana Attorney General, Jeff Landry. Mr. Attorney General, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thank you for having me.
Abortion rights advocates are claiming the Supreme Court's action as a victory. What's your response?
Well, look, I wouldn't read a whole lot into it. You know, trying to determine what the Supreme Court is going to do is kind of like trying to predict who's going to win the Super Bowl before the season starts. I would tell you that it's interesting, though, the case here in Louisiana. One, it's kind of ridiculous we're having this discussion because basically Louisiana just passed a law that placed abortion clinics in conformity with the rest of all other health care clinics in Louisiana. And of course, that law, Act 620, was then challenged. We had a judge in Baton Rouge rule that that law was unconstitutional. We took the case to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit ruled that the law was constitutional.
It's been back and forth and back and forth in the courts.
Suspended and
It's been back and forth. I'm sorry, I think we have a delay on the satellite.
That's
I didn't mean
correct.
to cut you off.
It has been back and forth. We've got the Fifth Circuit now ruling that the law is constitutional, and last week the Supreme Court stayed the law, basically suspended the enforcement of the law until they had an opportunity to review it.
Well, you've said this vote by the Supreme Court is creating a double standard when it comes to women's health care. In your view, why are hospital admitting privileges for doctors performing abortions so important?
Well, look, because Every time that a patient goes into a doctor's office or a clinic here in Louisiana, Louisiana's law requires that if the procedure requires the patient to be mildly sedated, then the doctor must have admitting privileges. That's the case for every other procedure in Louisiana except abortion. The legislature closed that loophole, basically placing the abortion clinics back into conformity with the rest of the health clinics in Louisiana. That's a pro-women's health care bill. We're concerned about the patient. You want the doctor to have admitting privileges when you're performing a procedure that's invasive like an abortion.
But pro-abortion advocates would say that that's just a way to get around being able to not have abortions. But pro-life activists were optimistic that the current makeup of the Supreme Court would be more receptive to pro-life issues. Do you think that belief was misplaced?
No, I don't. I know there's been a lot of criticism weighed in on the Chief Justice. I would caution everyone to recognize that he did dissent in the Texas case, under which a Texas law dealing with admitting privileges was brought up to the Supreme Court. The court makeup, of course, then was different. At that time, Justice Roberts dissented and would have upheld the Texas law. This may be an opportunity for the Chief Justice to get a second bite at the apple.
Okay, well, that's going to be coming up. We could know. You're remaining hopeful. I understand that the Supreme Court could take a look at this again. Thank you so much for joining us, Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry. A prosecutor in New York drops an unlawful abortion charge against a man accused of killing his pregnant girlfriend. It's the first time a case has been brought since a new law removed abortion from the criminal code. Pro-life supporters say those who attack pregnant women should be charged with killing an unborn child. Up next, the Catholic group Healing Immigrants on the Texas-Mexico border is on the move. And a church in Virginia hosts a big night for some teens with special needs. City commissioners in Texas order a Catholic group to vacate their temporary shelter for immigrants near the U.S.-Mexico border. The Monitor newspaper reports officials in McAllen, Texas, have given Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley 90 days to find a new home. Neighbors had complained about constant traffic and strangers wandering the streets. Sister Norma Pimentel, who runs the center and has been a guest on EWTN News Nightly, says she does not think her work negatively affects the community. Last Friday night, a Catholic church in Virginia brought in hairdressers and makeup artists, volunteers who shine shoes, and a ton of food from a caterer. What is it? It's a party. More than 100 teenagers with special needs attended the Tim Tebow Night to Shine prom. And it was at All Saints Church here in Manassas. That's where these pictures are from. The foundation was started by the former pro football quarterback, who's a devout Christian, and hosted more than 90,000 honored guests in more than 500 churches around the world last week. All Saints was selected because a parishioner thought it would be a wonderful way to show God's love to the teenagers. And by looking at these pictures, you can tell for yourself she was right. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.